Welcome everybody, good morning. Hopefully we've got all the folks who are interested in coming on board to chat with us this morning about Phase 4 in our webinar Instructional Continuity Series. It is my pleasure to say good morning to you all and just want to first off say thanks and express our gratitude here at the Texas Education Agency for all of the work that is going on across the state of Texas to be able to help kids in what are clearly very trying times. And a personal thanks to all folks who have contributed resources, time, and energy to be able to help us be able to best support those of you who are in the field and doing the great work every day. So none of this would be possible without the work that you've been able to provide. So thank you so much for that. My name is Tyson Kane. I'm Associate Commissioner here of Strategy, Analytics, and Assessment at the Texas Education Agency. I'm joined today by a couple of panelists who are going to work with us today to walk through some elements of Phase 4 and would invite those panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves here in an initial intro, and then I'll lay out where we're headed, and then we'll jump right in. So Iris, if you'd go first.
Yep. My name is Iris Tian. I'm the Director of Strategy and Operations within TEA's Assessment Division, and I will be speaking about monitoring student progress today.
Great. Ed?
I am Edward O'Neill. I am the Division Director for Special Projects and Strategy in the Office of Special Populations and Monitoring, and I will be talking about discipline and privacy constraints and considerations.
Great. And Ashley?
I'm Ashley Prevost. I'm the Manager of Instructional Leadership working in Educator Support, and I'm going to talk about teacher and staff check-ins.
Great. All right, well, thanks everybody again for joining, and let's go ahead and jump in. So just as context, we have had this instructional webinar series going on for this week, each day at the same time. Went through Phase 0, 1, 2, and 3 on previous days this week. So hopefully you've had a chance to be able to be involved in listening into those series. If not, they are recorded, as is this one. And so we'll go ahead and post it if they're not already up so that you can view them remotely. But today we're going to be talking about Phase 4, which is primarily built around once you have gotten some elements of your initial remote learning plans up and running. Here is how to make sure they continue to run smoothly and what things you would want to consider in trying to make sure that all of the students are continuing to be engaged and you've got the right pulse checks with staff and teachers to be able to improve the model. Just a quick recap, it's kind of establishing the landscape initially after laying out a project plan, figuring out what kind of curriculum and instruction you'd want to do at home, operationalizing that, and then coming to the chapter that we're in now to be able to talk about monitoring and ongoing operations. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about the framework. I'm going to head to the website just to remind everybody of where to find materials, review that structure on the website, and then, as I say, we're going to go ahead and dive into our Phase 4. All right, so if you follow me to the web page, we are here at the COVID-19 support and guidance page, which is the main splash page for TEA on all information related to COVID-19 and remote instruction. There's a number of resources here that I wanted to just make sure that we pointed out for those who have not had a chance to join the webinars before. Public health resources at the top, the debriefs from the commissioner's superintendent calls, which have been happening daily at various times, but usually around 3 in the afternoon. So we encourage folks to be a part of those if they haven't. And then we have kind of the section on guidance and FAQs. Instructional continuity, the information we're talking about is actually here. But down below, there's a number of other elements of information related to closure guidance, assessment, waiver information, staff, school board issues, nutrition, etc. So I encourage you to check those out if you haven't had a chance to do so. And in the Instructional Continuity Planning Framework site, these are the phases that we just reviewed, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to come here to Phase 4, which is provide monitoring and support. And the first topic that we're going to cover related to this is the first section, which the monitoring and support is divided into these kind of 5 sections. The overview is this. So first, monitoring student progress. This is really about how to make sure that you have a pulse on how students are doing in the remote learning environment. This is primarily from a measurement of mastery perspective, in looking at what kinds of academic performance is going on, so that you can adjust curriculum and instruction the same way you would if you were in a school building. 4.2 is about providing supports to staff primarily. So making sure that your normal teacher check-in cadence, like as an instructional leader or as a building principal or another at the district level, has the visibility into making sure that staff are well supported in their work. 4.3 is about kind of diagnosing more technical type of problems. These are usually focused by giving a feedback mechanism so that people can say, hey, I can access this virtual platform, or I can't, or I'm having trouble, or with kind of internet issues that may be prevalent. 4.4 is about looking at kind of other operational considerations. So a few that we'll highlight today are thinking about attendance and maybe even some discipline considerations, because those can be unique in a virtual environment. And then finally we'll make a mention of how to look at improving the model on an ongoing basis by getting continuous feedback from stakeholders with various collection methods. So that's the overview. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Iris, who's going to talk with you about monitoring student progress here in section 4.1.
Great, thanks, Tyson. So I am going to talk about monitoring student progress. I'm going to start off by doing a brief overview of what this section entails, and then I will dive into one of the resources that we have on this page, the Student Progress Monitoring Template. So first, I want to start off by acknowledging that this is phase 4. And so while some of your districts may have already begun working on or thinking about monitoring progress, others of you are probably still in some of the earlier phases. And it may not make sense for you to be thinking about monitoring progress right now if you haven't yet established an at-home curriculum or instructional model, or figured out the best way to reach students yet. And so these resources are here to support you when you are in a place to think about progress monitoring, whether that's now or in the future. And as Tyson said earlier, all of these webinars are recorded, so you can come back to it at a later time. So monitoring student progress is a really important part of any instructional program. And I think particularly in this new, unique, and challenging environment, once you have established an at-home instructional model, monitoring whether or not students have learned can actually help you figure out whether those new remote instructional methods and materials are successful, and can give you the information you need to adjust those methods and materials as we continue adapting to this current situation. And part of monitoring student progress is determining grades. And we have provided some guidance on grading, report cards, and graduation in a previous section, section 2.2. So we won't be going over that today. Grading does consider multiple factors, so work ethic, engagement, maybe participation, in addition to student performance. And so we know we can't rely on grades alone to track student mastery and growth. When we think about monitoring student progress, it can come in a lot of different forms, and we can think about it from the lens of different assessment types. So for example, we have formative assessments that measure specific standards immediately after instruction. So the traditional exit tickets, checks for understandings, quizzes. We have interim assessments that serve as benchmarks at the midpoint of a curricular unit. And then we have summative assessments that measure mastery of a broad span of knowledge and skills at the end of an instructional unit or year. As you all are aware, Governor Abbott has suspended our annual assessment requirements for the remainder of the school year. And so while the TELPAS window has been extended and will stay open until May 29th for districts to complete optionally, but STAR, including 3 through 8, EOC, and STAR Alternate 2, are all canceled for the remainder of the school year. Under normal circumstances, these assessments serve as a summative assessment tool that can accurately and reliably diagnose how well students have learned their grade level and course content, for parents to use to support the academic growth of their children, for educators to use to adjust how they can maximize student learning in their teaching. And while this typical state assessment data won't be available this year due to the cancellation of STAR, we are working to continue to support schools by making other tools available to diagnose student learning. We have extended our STAR interim assessment windows to May 29th, which for those of you who are not aware, our interim assessments are free, optional, not tied to accountability. Students can actually test on or off grade level and can be used this spring as well as next fall if you're interested in using that as a tool. We're also working right now to provide additional tools for this spring and the beginning of the next school year, and we'll provide more information as those tools become available. Okay, so I'm now going to turn to the first resource in 4.1, the Student Progress Monitoring Template. So this resource was one that we already covered in a previous superintendent call, so some of you may have seen it before, but I'm just going to briefly go over it again here today. So this is a template which you can adapt in whatever way is helpful for your district, and it is an example of a document that allows you to track different ways that students can and have demonstrated mastery of knowledge and skills. So this template allows you to monitor progress for each individual student, which you can input into the vertical columns and can be organized by class or by other student grouping. And it also allows you to monitor performance by standard or skill, which you can see you can input into the horizontal rows. For each standard and each student, you can fill in the cells in the middle to track when and how students have demonstrated mastery. And this is a template that can be used for any subject or grade level, including electives, since you actually can go in and input whatever standard or skill that you want to track. So we do have two examples in the other tabs to show you what this might look like completed. So we have one for Algebra 1 and the one that is more a K2 skills-based example. So that is this resource, and now I'm going to turn things over back to Tyson to talk about our next one.
You're muted, Tyson.
Tyson, you're muted.
There we go. Hey, everybody. Thanks. We had a question come through, Iris, that you may be able to speak to on where we find the STAR interim assessments.
Yep, so we have STAR interim assessments. There's a website on our TEA webpage, which you can find if you look at the screen share right now up in the student assessment section. The STAR interim assessments are on the exact same platform that the STAR test is on, so registration and all that can be done through your district testing coordinator. So if you have questions about that, I would recommend reaching out to them, and they can get in contact with us if they would need any support with implementing.
Great. Thanks so much, and keep the questions coming. For those that we can answer that are related to the topic, we'll do, and the others we'll go ahead and hold to the end, but we'll definitely make sure that we kind of gather them together for similar themes as best we can. So thanks for sending those over. Remote counseling supports is the only other one I just wanted to highlight in this section. So as part of monitoring student progress, there's of course academic concerns, but then there's also a lot of things that are important about not only student just general welfare and health, but also ensuring that our students who are kind of on their trajectory to go for college graduation have the right supports they need, especially as seniors. So I just want to call out that there's a great remote counseling supports resource here. We're not going to have time to go through it today, but encourage you to pop that open and take a look. It's a planning guide that's kind of organized by elements of a comprehensive, excuse me, a comprehensive counseling program. And so for each of those components, it outlines a bunch of key considerations in the document that you may want to think about in a remote environment. So great opportunity to check that out. What we're going to do is go ahead and move forward to some teacher supports and looking at the staff interaction. So with that, I will turn it over to Ashley.
Thanks, Tyson. So in this section, really, we're just looking at resources that are available to support instructional coaches, principals, assistant principals, and supporting teachers in ensuring that they're still able to ensure students are learning and supporting them with any challenges they have in this time. So Tyson, if you can go ahead and open the teacher check-in document. We just know that supporting teachers is important now more than ever to ensure that they have what they need to support students wherever they are in the state. So this template is designed to provide structure for teacher check-ins with their coaches, whoever that may be on your campus or in your district. It allows both parties to prepare prior to meeting to ensure that everyone is ready to ask about what they need to ask about and doesn't leave the check-in wishing they had talked about something they didn't get a chance to talk about. And ensures that teachers' well-being is the first thing that is discussed during these calls, just to ensure that our staff feel supported and know that they are valued as people first and foremost. It allows the coach to ensure the teacher's tracking both student engagement as well as student mastery, and to excavate any challenges the teacher may be experiencing with whatever virtual format your district or campus is using. There's also space at the bottom to capture any action items to check in during your next scheduled meeting to ensure that accountability is still happening. Really, that's it.
Great, thanks, Ashley. As we continue on to 4.3, I'll go ahead and mention there that there's really just a consideration here for thinking about a way that when technical issues come up, folks have a way to be able to submit those, or at least get them to someone who might be able to help out. There's a few different templates here for sample help desk systems, but I want to come over to our district created examples and come down to Katy. Katy has obviously a very, it's a larger district, of course, and so it has some really well-developed resources, though, that I want to point out for parent tech. And so here is a splash page that you land on for technology-related issues for parents to be able to log in. And there's a number of features here that clearly have been set up, before the existing crisis. But this is just a really thorough example of kind of how that parent interface can potentially work and what ways there are different forms to look at. That said, you might say, well, gosh, we don't have as robust a platform just yet, and that's okay. What you can do, even just as a simple method of this, is just use a web form. And even if it's just its own web form, like Katy here has set up, which we think is really great, you can just go ahead and submit your name, kind of who you are, what's the nature of the issue, and whatever way they can contact you. And then that can just come in, and then folks can be able to get back information. So something like this is much easier to stand up on your website if that's a thing that you have, but we just encourage having a mechanism to be able to look for those kinds of issues as they may come through and give people the opportunity to be able to voice some of those technical concerns as they pop up. So let's talk a bit more comprehensively about how to support operations, I would say of which some of the technical issues are a subset. So I'm going to go here to 4.4, which is supporting our ongoing operations, and pull up this document. And this is the guide. So those of you who are familiar with the format, each one of these sections has a guide over on the left that's like a written narrative for the portion of the phase of planning that you're looking for. And it provides some steps and guidance that's in a little more detail than just some of the resources do. And here, I just want to point out that in 4.4, it does make sense to kind of go ahead and create a centralized process for folks to be able to continue to give feedback on what's working and what's not. It's really tough to create in remote instruction any design, but it's even harder to do it all at the first time perfectly. And so I think everybody understands there's just going to be, changes that come and improvements that come, and that's okay. And we're in an environment where more communication is better. And so being responsive to that is a great thing. And so the way you set up this process is making sure that you have some way to collect information. So like I said, we're going to refer a little bit later to category 4.5, but even if a web form is too complex, or even setting that up, just something that's simple that could say, hey, I could set up an email channel that allows people to go ahead and submit information to the district is a great simple way to do that. So we do that at TEA with a disaster info at tea.texas.gov. And then when you've got that channel, it's great to have a team, and even if it's only one person, that's fine too, who can kind of go through the information that comes through and then be able to categorize it and curate it so you can farm it out to various places across the organization where it can be addressed. And so in that sense, you have various experts working across the district or even the school that may be able to look at those groups of questions and say, hey, this is a new priority, or this is a new place that we need to make sure we put some resources, and they can make some great solutions for that. How do we provide that ongoing operational support? Well, once you've made the solution and you've made that new innovation, or you change the format, or you change the policy, it's really important that you go ahead after you've made the solution to do some training and make sure that you communicate it well. So that means getting it out to the stakeholders through your normal channels in many cases, but offering some support for how to access the new thing. So whether that's pushed out through teachers or at the school level through principals, or whether that's something that you're doing more centrally and saying, hey, we've set up a few videos on a YouTube channel. Feel free to log in and view them when you get a chance to understand how to do this new solution. And thanks for the feedback. So really encourage just kind of setting up a way to formalize the ability to get that feedback as it continues to come in, so you can continuously improve the process as we go. Because perfection just doesn't happen on day one. One other resource I want to point you to before we turn over to Ed is this attendance policy considerations resource. So we've talked about grading, we've talked a little bit about student monitoring from an academic performance standpoint. But attendance itself, while not required to be collected, is really important to check in with your kids, of course, in this environment to make sure that they are continuing to be engaged. So I just encourage you to check out this resource. I won't read it to you here, but coming down to the bottom, there is a table. And this table talks about kind of different ways you may be able to make sure that students are engaged depending on your district situation. So it's kind of broken down by a learning environment. And what that means is whether or not your learning right now is going on real time in the sense of having all the students together at the same time that the instruction's going on, or whether it's not real time, so synchronous or asynchronous. And not real time would be, you post some videos, folks can watch them when they want to, and then they submit an assignment later that comes through an email where not everybody is together at that same time. And then you got different technology levels along the side here. Realizing folks have different sophistication. If you say, well, gosh, what's a real-time way at a low tech to be able to check in on my kids and see how they're participating? Well, conference or phone calls, right? In the classic sense. Similarly, if we move to like a medium tech solution, you'd be looking at things like, the video conferences that folks have been doing on Zoom or in other particular topics. Similarly, if it's asynchronous, you might have a blog or a posting section where folks can come in and just kind of post up a question that gets responded to later that everybody can see, or completion of some of those web forms we were talking about in our prior example with Katie ISD. And then for those who have the really high sophistication, there's a lot of tools out there where the tracking can be done by the analytics of the tool itself. So meaning that there are different platforms, learning platforms, these are usually learning management systems, where you can actually have your own independent login. And as folks log in, you can see like the number of minutes that they've been involved in that, what different pieces of the work they've completed or haven't completed. There's a number of resources that are like this, some more sophisticated than other. Canvas is a very sophisticated version of this. Khan Academy has a number of these kind of tools that many teachers might even use in their own classrooms that you can also use remotely with logins for kids. So these are different opportunities to be able to just keep track of participation and make sure you've got a good idea of the engagement as you go. With that, I'll turn it over to Ed to talk a little bit about discipline and dress code.
Thanks, Dustin. So with dress code's pretty easy. Looking at what's in the field on a national scale, as well as like other schools that have already moved to virtual or already doing virtual work. Many of them already have just adhere to the same dress codes you'd see in a traditional school. Even talking to some, they just for continuity for their students, they want their kids to still wear their uniform shirts and stuff like that, just so the kids have that same experience that school is school and it still looks the same and it still feels the same for them. Related to that, thinking about discipline, I would say, the first thing to consider is if you're going to use a virtual environment, consider using platforms and tools that allow you to quickly respond to some of the issues that you could run into. So making sure that teachers set it up so they have the ability to mute video, mute audio of participants very quickly. You may want to have platforms that, or have controls put in place of who can share their screen and who can't. Those are ways very quickly to mitigate some of the problems that you could run into from a discipline standpoint. When you're looking at specifically discipline, teachers may want to, and administrators may want to look at considering kind of progressive models of, if you have students that are being disruptive and being problematic in learning, considering moving them from live whole group sessions to potentially small group sessions, or moving them from engaging in the live whole group session to viewing the recorded sessions, all the way progressively moving to some of those students may, like, similar to kind of thinking about ISS and how we do ISS in a brick and mortar is, you know, ISS is often packets, and kids are getting work that they're doing independently and returning back to the teachers. It is important to note that when you're looking at discipline, make sure you're considering for students with disabilities FAPE, and that ARDs are being implemented, services, accommodations, behavior plans, all of that still applies. Whether it's brick and mortar or it's virtual, we still need to make sure that we're providing FAPE and adhering to special education rules. Next, I'll move to privacy and confidentiality a little bit. There is a link that's going to go up. It's in another spot, but it hasn't been linked here yet, so we'll get it up as soon as we can. With privacy and confidentiality, the best way to think about it is it doesn't matter that you're now in a virtual world. The same rules apply with privacy and confidentiality. If I'm teaching a whole group of seventh graders when I taught mathematics, there would be no point in a direct face-to-face classroom would I ever say something along the lines of, Marcus, you know, now would be a time you use your computer for an accommodation. I would never announce that to an entire class. Similarly, in a virtual setting, you shouldn't do that. You know, that would be, instead I would walk over to Marcus and say, hey, now you can use your computer to do the writing portion. You can send a message to a student through some of these platforms, or email them in advance. When we do this, this is when you can use your tools. We've had questions about privacy of, you know, if we're having live engagement with our students and a sibling walks by or a parent walks by and sees instruction, do we have to worry about privacy and confidentiality? The answer is no. As long as personal identifiable information, or PII, is not being disclosed in those videos, it's no different than that parent or that sibling or that family member walking down the hallway of your brick and mortar school. That family member or that sibling, classroom doors are open. They're going to hear instruction. They may walk into their child's classroom and see other students in that room. There are not privacy and confidentiality concerns there. Viewing student instruction is not a private or confidential item. It's only when you start getting into personally identifiable information that you should really consider those constraints. Similar, you know, having platforms, if you're having recorded lessons where students are viewable, you know, setting those up in platforms so that they are password protected, or they're just not on your general website, so that there's controls in place. Again, we have resources and information that are coming out related to FERPA and privacy, but the best way to think about it is, if it was not okay to do it when you had brick and mortar class, it's not okay to do virtually. So I'll turn it back over to Tyson.
Great. And Ed, did you want to go through the discipline and dress code resource?
Oh, sure.
Yep.
If you want to open it. Okay. So again, we talked about some of these things with other states. You know, again, the content there is violations of it should be, you know, violations of it should be treated in a way, moving through that progressive discipline, considerations of, you know, maybe if you have a student that is not following dress code, you set it up so that their video is not viewable to the rest of the class. If you have students that continue to be problematic with discipline and display problematic behavior, move through some of those progressive channels where instead of accessing live direct instruction, they're now moving to packets, or they're moving to individual sessions with the teacher, or follow-ups, or they're viewing recorded lessons. If you scroll down some more, where's the South Carolina, it might be back on the references page. The South Carolina virtual school has a good reference. It's the bottom one, virtual school, South Carolina, code of conduct. This is a virtual school. This is a good resource that we looked at for, they really did a strong job of identifying how to think about discipline and how to think about engagement, how to think about violations. So this is a good resource that districts can use to kind of build some of their own code of conducts off of.
Great.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Ed. Appreciate it. And finally, just wanted to make a mention of making sure that you kind of give ways to be able to continue to give feedback that may be even beyond just the collection of an email address, because that tends to be more reactive. So having a web form or an email address to get information from folks is a way to say, if something pops up, shoot us a message. But in this environment, as the structure gets its feet under you and you have some ways to be able to do instruction regularly, it may make sense to go ahead and create some of your own surveys and tools that you send out. So a lot of folks have done this actually even in the initial phases to try and get an idea of like what's the amount of internet access or technological capability that our kids and schools have, or excuse me, kids and parents have. And so that's going to affect what ways we think about our offerings. So more proactive surveys are always a great way to be able to collect that information as you're thinking about new planning steps or making changes. So we've got a few resources here to be able to help do that in ways to be able to set it up. With that, that's the overview of phase 4. Happy to go turn to some questions. I see we've got a few posted here and be able to try and cover what we can. Also, folks who are on the panel, feel free to jump in if you see something that we might do, but I'll just kind of go through some of the top as I look at some of the themes. So a few of these, I may refer you to go ahead and submit to disaster info if we don't have the disaster info at TEA.texas.gov, which is kind of that main site for us to be able to get some answers. We have a question about TPRI assessments. I'd encourage you to go ahead and submit that question there to disaster info because we don't have the detail on that here today. As far as pass-fail for grading, so just as a quick note, overall on grading, I want to point out that here we're in phase 4, but if you go back to the Instructional Continuity Planning Framework page, and you come down under additional guidance, here it says guidance on grading and graduation. And so though Iris mentioned that this was covered in section 2.2, which is also there as well, there's also just a large amount of information related to grading and other implications that are associated with that. So we have some questions that are of the flavor of, what if we do pass-fail grading? Do we have to grade? These kinds of things. I will tell you, grading in summary is a locally determined issue as far as how you grade. I certainly believe you need to grade, but there's nothing from a outside of this guidance here that I wouldn't consider. So I would read through this if you have kind of concerns or which ways that you want to think about how do we move forward with our report cards, calculating GPAs, districts, and whatnot. There's a very clear kind of set of things that say what's required and what's not required here in this document. So it's a great resource for you on those. As far as the templates are concerned, so back in phase 4, we were looking at this student progress monitoring template. And you'll notice that in this template, we've actually got a way for you to kind of enter whatever it is that you want to enter. So if you wanted to use this when you're looking at how to do your performance mastery, the examples here have numbers that are associated with the performance mastery for each assignment. So this says, for this student, this was this particular standard, they got a quiz on this date, and they got a 90% on it. And this is kind of tracking the mastery of these different elements to say, what's the mastery of this standard? But you could use this tool in the same way if you're just saying, well, for mastery, I just want to know on a binary basis, did they meet a threshold or not meet a threshold? And you could kind of assign that threshold in the template itself. So it's versatile, that allows you to be able to create those different kinds of approaches or situations. Let's look through another few questions here. Give us just a minute.
Tyson, I can take the question about intervention.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there was a question about how should interventions classes be handled as far as parents knowing that certain students are intervention. So again, it goes back to personally identifiable information. In those intervention classes, you're not specifically calling out that a student is in intervention. So it would be no different than a special education teacher doing a webinar or a video lesson with 4 or 5 students all in that environment. As long as you're not sharing personally identifiable information, there isn't a FERPA violation. So to the question specifically, should be a letter for parents to agree that child's picture be shown on the screen. I guess the question would be, that depends on what you're doing with those. If you're recording those sessions and keeping those sessions for an educational record, you may want to consider that. It also depends on what your board policy looks like regarding the capturing of images. Some districts have different board policy regarding what that looks like. So I'd look there first. But is there a specific concern regarding FERPA or privacy? As long as the question really becomes the personally identifiable information. That is the first benchmark or threshold you should look at.
Okay, great. Last one we have is just kind of around discipline. So again, you can decide the approach to a lot of information that you want to do, or excuse me, you can decide the approach that you want to do when it comes to your own kind of discipline standards or your engagement in an online environment. So those are things that, more often than not, of course, the discipline code is approved by the board of the local district. But then there is some flexibility, right, within a school level and then within an individual classroom level to be able to make certain standards and expectations. For us, I think it's really important that the expectations, as educators, we would say the expectations, making those clear is really important for students in an online environment. And then, having the control for the teacher to be able to manage things in the way that they feel they need to. Because we had a question about, what if, kind of a what if scenario, which there's a lot of what if scenarios. I think the answer is make sure that you have the expectations clear and then have the means to be able to control the environment as you might need to. It's maybe not as easy, right, if you come to the environment and someone doesn't have the power to, say, mute somebody who's being disruptive, or potentially posting something inappropriate on a blog that you've created, that's for Q&A. And so you just have to kind of think through what if this doesn't get used as intended, and then what. So those are some elements. All right.
Tyson, let me jump in here. I had a couple of questions around STAR interim assessments and whether or not they can be given to students at home. And so the short answer is yes, students are able to access interim assessments at home, but they must download the secure browser on the device that they have at home. So we know that that's probably something more accessible to some students than to others. And so keep in mind that these were designed to be given in schools and not at home. So I think there may be a couple of logistical challenges associated with it, but it is possible. I will emphasize that we are currently in the process of putting together additional assessment resources with the current at-home environment in mind. And so those will hopefully be announced soon, and you'll have more information on what additional resources that you have available to you outside of the interims.
Yeah. And I'll just echo for Iris, we realize that there's a lot of limitations of the interim design in the existing environment. So we're working hard to be able to get you some additional things that you can use, especially in light of the fact that those who have used interims this year religiously kind of already have the data from them and are saying, well, gosh, I've got no STAR. What other tools do I have to be able to collect student performance information outside of the great work that our teachers do with their own quizzes and tests and local district benchmarks? So working hard to be able to get you some of that information. We expect to have more info real soon. All right, Ed, Iris, Ashley, any others or items that you'd like to address?
I don't think so.
Nope, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for participating today. We hope that the webinars have been useful to you in talking through the different questions and phases that have been coming up to be able to help implement what is a really difficult time. Again, I just say thanks. By gosh, happy Friday. Of all things, we can all use a bit of a weekend. I know many of us, it'll still be the same way the weekends have been for the last few weeks, which is not a lot of downtime, but stay strong. What you're doing is amazing. What everybody's bound together in the state of Texas is doing is amazing. I am heartened to just see all the support and the helpfulness and frankly the great acts of pretty awesome stuff that's just happening everywhere, and that people are really looking to lean on each other to be able to do. In many respects, it's bringing us closer together. which I think is you know, an awesome byproduct of a terrible situation. But thank you for all you do. We are, of course, ready and willing to continue to support. Feel free to reach out and contact us through that disaster info email if there's anything that we can do, and more materials and tools will be coming soon. Thanks again, everybody, and best to you.